Christy. I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for all being here today. I'm really excited to share the work we've been doing with our team at the Alliance and our collaborator, Whoop. And I'm curious, just to start, if you could raise your hand if you've ever worn a health tracking wearable device. I'm wearing one right now. Whoa, okay, that's way more than I expected. That's amazing. And if you wear a band or a watch or a ring, you probably see something like this where you can get your individual biometric data on a daily basis. And I think that's pretty incredible as a scientist. But I also think it's quite incredible that despite these terabytes of data from everyone who just raised their hand, we actually don't have a comprehensive picture of what happens with your physiology over a menstrual cycle. So our team wanted to look through the lens of a wearable device and see how do biometrics change each day across the cycle. And then once establishing that baseline, understand how do changes in behavior affect those biometrics across the cycle. We were lucky to work with Whoop, this company with a wrist-worn wearable device, and analyze a data set of almost 2,600 female users age 18 to 50 wearing this device for up to 2 years. You can tell that this is a relatively young and active cohort from their average age and BMI, which is not surprising because these are Whoop users and likely interested in their health. We wanted to look at regular menstrual cycles, so we selected those who are not using hormonal contraception or pregnant, and those who are consistently self-reporting their menstrual cycles through the mobile application, giving us around 20 cycles per person. In comparison, previous studies maybe looked at 3 cycles per person. And so we've got this data set of 10 times the number of people in this room, and also 1 million days of data, including activity, sleep, and biometrics. Now, the Whoop device is passively collecting biometrics all of the time, but we look specifically at the average nightly biometrics collected during sleep. This included skin temperature, resting heart rate, respiratory rate, heart rate variability, and blood oxygen saturation level. And I'm going to give you a little picture of what these look like. On the y-axis here, we have skin temperature in degrees Celsius. Over the days leading up to menstrual cycle onset on day 0 through the period and the days following. And here is our average curve for over 2,300 participants. It's zero mean and filtered, so you can really see the fluctuations throughout the cycle. And you can also see the 99% confidence interval. And what's really striking when you see this is how cyclical this signal really is, as Christy was talking about. We've known this for basal body temperature, but this has only recently been shown for skin temperature. We were really surprised to see that stark cyclicality across other biometrics, including resting heart rate, respiratory rate, where you've got this dip in the menstrual cycle, the bleed phase, this slow rise, a peak before the next menstrual cycle onset. And we also saw this in HRV and blood oxygen level, not shown here. It gave us some confidence to see that we were able to, in thousands of people, reproduce trends previously shown in much smaller in-lab studies or on much more coarse timescales like the scale of weeks. And we were able to see this on a daily basis in our thousands of people. Some of these biometrics we were able to see for the first time. For example, before this, we hadn't seen a daily characterization of respiration rate over a menstrual cycle. So maybe this will be a textbook figure someday. Let's take a closer look though. We were able to go one step further. I told you these are this is respiratory rate over cycles that are 28 days, but we know that people have different cycle lengths, right? Some people have longer cycles, maybe 32 days. Others have shorter cycles, 24 days. And what's interesting is that you can see for people with longer cycles in the orange line or brown line, they spend actually longer time at their minimum respiratory rate versus people with shorter cycles who have sort of a narrower bowl and spend less time at their low minimum respiratory rate. And now we can begin to ask questions like, you know, is this significant? What does this mean for an athlete if they're spending 1 or 2 days longer at their minimum, someone who has a longer cycle versus someone who has a shorter cycle? So we share actually a lookup table where you can look at what you'd expect for different biometric traces over different cycle lengths and ages. So we answered our first question. We saw these coordinated fluctuations across biometrics, across the cycle. Now the question is, if you change your behavior, how does that impact these biometrics? Well, first, how does behavior change over the cycle? We actually saw that participants sleep slightly less during the premenstrual or the week leading up to their cycle compared to their menstrual or postmenstrual weeks. And this was quite amazing that over the population, we saw this sort of 3-minute decrease. It's small, but it's over the population. We don't want to imply causality here because lots of things affect sleep duration, but what we can do is from this average bar, look at people who didn't change their sleep in their premenstrual week and those who did. And so we're going to do that now. So here's resting heart rate for participants, 2,000 participants who consistently slept 7 to 8 hours over their cycle. Now we're going to look at the 688 participants who actually decreased their sleep by 20 minutes in the premenstrual week. Let's see what happens to their resting heart rate. You get this little bump, this small but significant increase in resting heart rate. And it turns out, if you look at people who sleep even less, decrease their sleep even more, rather, you also get this increase in resting heart rate. And this shows that there's this sort of biometric response that scales with sleep deprivation. On the converse, we actually saw that if you increase your sleep duration, you decrease your resting heart rate. The next question is, okay, this is what happens in the premenstrual week, but what happens if you decrease your sleep in the menstrual or the postmenstrual week? It turns out that after a week of decreased sleep in the premenstrual, menstrual, or postmenstrual week, you see this like 2% or 1.5 beat per minute increase in resting heart rate. And this was consistent across people. This is just sort of the beginning of the types of questions we can ask. And we're now looking at what happens if you change your workout and how that affects your biometrics. It's a little bit more nuanced. Sarah's going to talk about it in our next talk. And stay tuned for that. So I've shown you what we can do with a large longitudinal data set. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to our team. Big thank you to my co-first author, Alex. And thank you all for listening and supporting female athlete research.